So welcome to Neuroplastic Mental Acceleration. And in this training, it's for people who would like to understand it, who would like to sell it, and people who would like to share it with their clients as an option. Why neuroplastic mental acceleration is so important is it is the future of coaching, it's the future of therapy, it's the future of training, it's the future of education. In fact, it's the future of anything to do with the development of human beings, because what it does is it puts first and foremost the development of the brain's structure itself rather than information as a key to expanding the mind. This is something that's very technical, and if you go the information route, then that's all you're ever going to have, and you're going to have a brain that's trying to recall lots of information, and that's how we've been conditioned to think, educated. But in terms of our true nature, information is not the way to go. It's actually expanding the brain itself. Its neuroplasticity, its flexibility to take on more information, to deal with more complex subjects. And I'm going to explain that to you in the context of developing hemispheric synchronization, flow state, and gamma and theta brainwaves for states of super creativity. And let's get started. So let's start with the brain. You've got left hemisphere and right hemisphere. You probably all know that they're two individual parts of the brain that are connected by the corpus callosum. And the left brain is really designed for convergent thinking, logical thinking. And while we've got two lines coming together here, is they're coming to a confluence. Really, when you're trying to do a problem solving, you're trying to get to a position, a solution. And in terms of intelligence, it's what we call crystal intelligence. It's really all the knowledge is coming in. It's sort of like a library of information, and that's your knowledge bank. And really, if you remember school, that's what the educational system's about. It's about getting you to remember information and regurgitate it at the right time. Now, divergent is different, and that's more right brain, which is more to do with intuition, insight, creativity, agile thinking. It's more about a fluid intelligence, and it's the two work together. Neither one is better or worse than the others, but fluid intelligence is certainly good for new skills and certainly essential for where we originated. We've been on the planet for 200, 300,000 years, depending on who's been doing the calculation, and we've had to be here, updating ourselves all the time, increasing our skill capability depending on a changing environment, changing situations, threats, all sorts of things. And we've had to be able to do that all through our lives. We can't just get to a position and stop being fluid in developing new skills. Then that would lead to our extinction, really. So this is where we started off, and that's why it's important for you to get a grasp of where you started off when you came to this planet, and how your brain is an ultimate survival mechanism designed to cope with lots of situations through one, taking on information and problem solving, and the other one, using that information to create new skills and be innovative and really be able to overcome situations through, intuition and insight. So very different kinds of thinking, but balanced together. And we call this hemispheric synchronization. Your brain is meant to have a balance of the two working together in conjunction, so you are super dynamic to be able to cope with any position. And at 5 years old, might surprise you to know that 98% of children have a genius level of innovative, creative capacity. Which means that we were all pretty well geniuses. And when it says that that's what it was. And that was from a NASA study by a guy called Dr. George Land and Dr. Beth Jarman back in 95, where they researched for NASA the states of innovation of a mind, and they found this to be the case. But unfortunately, other information came forward which showed that there was a huge decline from this age. Now, I'm going to ask you in a moment whether you think that is natural or not, but I want you to keep in mind we've been here for 200 to 300,000 years. And you've got to decide as to whether it would be natural that you would lose your fluid intelligence skills by an early age, and thus be relying on only what you'd known to that point, what you'd learned. And you can decide right now whether that would have benefited you in the evolution terms or not. But what we found is that by the age of 25 years, the fluid intelligence is virtually down to zero. That means it's really only convergent that is left. And that's a big old limitation. If we're born with this wonderful hemispheric synchronization, genius level, and then we're going down by the age of 25 years to a point where only 2% of the population actually retain that genius level. And I would have suggested that in evolutionary terms, if that had been the case and it was natural, and that we would have had a race of very powerful thinkers, because everybody else had gone extinct. All those 2% would have added up and we've been a genius level race at the moment. But that hasn't quite happened, and we've got to look at why that is. So what is causing this? Well, there's an education bias. This means when you go to school, you go to university, you remember that they want you to remember as much information as possible and not actually critically think, not exactly question anything, but just absorb tons of information. And you do this probably from the age of 5 to probably the age of 18 without any questions whatsoever before they start getting you into a debate or something like that. It's a huge hit on the brain to be able to squash it into really crystal intelligence, and it is at the demise of the fluidity of your brain and the agility of your brain. So what does this do for you in terms of, well, you're not necessarily going to need to survive an attack by a saber-toothed tiger, but what it does do is it prepares you to go into society with a key skill, and that means that your career will be based around that key skill of a process, left brain convergent thinking, and you're basically going along that route all the time, just doing and repeating something that you have learned and repeating it again and again and again. So the cost is all your fluid intelligence skills, and you probably realise that there are certain symptoms to this. If you remain in purely left brain systems, then you're going to have a position of what we call information. The brain is constantly in formation. All right, it's not doing anything but forming like its library of information, and that means it can't really be very creative at all. It can't be very agile. It's got to be reactionary. It's got to be restrictive. It's got to be a repeater of information. It tends to be a resistor of change, and it's really a receiver of information. It doesn't do as a mechanism, as a structure, as an organ, a great deal more than that if it's stuck in the convergent left brain side. If it wasn't, however, it would be in something what we would call the wise domain, and you can call this wisdom if you like. Wise domain means that the way that the brain is processing in this kind of state is very much more actionary. It's very much more going out there and taking effective action, making decisions. It's what's called actualized. You might have remembered the term from Maslow, the great psychologist. It means that it's self-actualized. It's aware on a very high level of its environment and itself. It's agile. It means that it can move very fluidly from one subject to another, and also bring multiple subjects together and holistically look at a problem and solve it. A bit like if you want to think of Sherlock Holmes, for example, what was the key to his skill? Well, it wasn't just the fact that he was logic. It was the fact that he could use insight and innovation to be coupled with logic and hemispheric synchronization to think a lot quicker than other people who were just going with processed left brain. If you're in information as a subject, then you're going to be a negatively polarized person. Most of what you think and what you say is going to come out in some form of negative situation, which is going to be self-restrictive. And we're going to go into that in a minute to explain why that is. If you were in the wise domain, then you would be expansive. You would be exploring the world. You were exploring life itself to much more powerful effect. And really, you could say that you'd be on one's 2D and the other one's, I don't know, 5D. It's just full technicolor as opposed to black and white, and that's how we live our lives. But we think it's normal because we've been conditioned to that left brain side. Now, if we want to explain this a little bit deeper, we've got to look at two kinds of ways of living. One is the way where we were always in hemispheric synchronization from that early age. And the second way is when we've been conditioned over the educational system, the work system, the social system, to be within a mental cage. Now, to remain within the mental cage, excuse me, you have to have a number of systems that stop you thinking about what it might be like to be more. In other words, it doesn't occur to you that you could be more. The only way that you think that you could be more is to get more information. And information, as I said, is not wisdom. It's just more in the library of the mind, which is in survival terms of no use whatsoever unless you could survive a pub quiz. Because then, yes, we want lots of information, but outside of that, it's just useless. And the brain is optimized over many, as we can see, many hundreds of thousands of years, is optimized for deletion of material that isn't relevant, because it doesn't add up to anything. It just is like an ego base, the more you can remember. But to do this and stop us thinking in super creative ways, the ego itself has to have some defense mechanisms which are called doubt, delay, denial, distraction, distortion, and deletion, to make you happy within the cage of the mind. And these are internal to you. So you've undergone the psychological lobotomization in the school, the university, and now to remain in that and not want more, you've got to really distort reality quite a lot and doubt that in yourself that you could be more. You've got to delay doing anything about it. You've got to really be often in denial about the fact that you could be more than you are, even though you know other people are way ahead, to maintain your sense of power within your limited world. You've got to be able to distort and delete information and distract yourself away from things that might threaten your current perspective. So what then comes into play is not just the education, but you then have something called the construct, which is a conformity situation for your mind, where you have social conformity. You've got to do what other people want. You've got religious conformity, because otherwise you won't go to heaven. You've got legal and political conformity, which is within the system that you're operating. Wherever you are in the world will be different, but ultimately it's leading towards your suppression, so you cannot do certain things and you have to abide by certain rules that are politically enforced and legally enforced. And then on the bottom, you've got commercial conformity. This means that you've got to go to work to maintain yourself within the system, within the single skill that you've been able to develop, and you can't develop any more. And that allows you to have these feelings of doubt, delay, denial, distraction, distortion, and deletion, to maintain yourself within this prison from inside yourself. So you can see that within the construct, you have a mechanism inside you that is stopping you growing, and you've got a mechanism outside of you that you've got to conform to. In terms of brainwave, if you're in the left brain, convergent thinking, for a long period of time, then it's going to be detrimental to your mind. And not only is your capacity to think going to go down as far as the genius to the 25, 30 years of life period, but you're going to be mainly operating in alpha and beta brainwaves. And there's nothing wrong with them. They're just very much more basic. They're very good for basic problem solving and getting through life, and they would be super cool, other than the fact that there's a lot more that you can have access to. But in this state, the conscious is unconscious, and it might be a surprise to you to know that in terms of consciousness, your mind at the moment is in this unconscious place that it's designed to be in until such time as it wakes up. And that's difficult for our egos to take, because we're going, well, I am awake, I do know what I'm talking about. But there's certain symptoms that you've got within you that are determining that your conscious is unconscious. And if you are suffering doubt, delay, denial, distraction, distortion and deletion, and you are conforming within the construct, and if you're in the alpha and beta, brainwaves, then you are really functioning at about 40 bits of data per second in your conscious mind. So that's why you're having difficulty being creative, creatively problem solving, empathetically understanding, critically thinking, or co-creating with other people. Because your brain is just not going very quickly. It's good at its process that it's learned, but outside of that, take it out of that box, and it gets a little bit insecure, it gets unsure, gets a bit tongue-tied, all the different things that you know. So what we have here is a shell kind of crystal mindset based around convergent thinking, and you'll find that pretty well, in fact, I'm going to guarantee you, everyone you know are in this structure to some degree. If they're going to work, they're in that structure. If they're working for somebody else, they're in that structure. If they're running a business, they're in that structure. And it will vary slightly, but ultimately you can listen to their language patterns and you can find that most of the time they're in the negative frequency of what they can't do, what they don't think, and what shouldn't happen. We can't, I can't, it shouldn't. And it's a lot of moaning goes on in here because there's no way to think beyond this structure once you're in it. You've always got to absolve your thinking to somebody else who knows more than you that can solve the problem for you. And this is why in this structure we need a leadership system, because we just don't think for ourselves. We do within our realm, but we think that realm is the only one that there is. And then we come into a different side, and this is your alternative, and this is the one I'm going to propose to you. I certainly can't force you to have it, but it would seem the one that you had when you were 5, when you were a genius, and I would cordially urge you to move towards that, because what's going to be required of you in the very near future is that to stay in any form of work or any form of industry that is going to navigate the fourth industrial revolution, you're going to be having to re-engage your fluid intelligence. And this means you're going to be moving from the mindset, what you think and the way you think right now, to the mind space, a place where you really have a crucible of super creativity. And that is back to our hemispheric synchronization, flow state, and the ability to really just allow the brain to work in the way it should, which is really, to a degree, you stopping self-identifying through limitation and just giving the brain the chance to do all the work for you in the way it was designed. Now, the difference is, instead of doubt, delay, denial, distraction, distortion and deletion, you're going to have high communication skills. You're going to get high levels of confidence. And we're not talking about illusory confidence. We're talking about genuine confidence coming from knowing your subject, your mind, yourself. Know thyself. You've got high levels of creativity, high levels of consistency, high levels of commitment, and high levels of continuity. These are all powerful words that allow you to live in a really forged the way of a head path kind of way. It's a completely different way to the way that you're currently living, and I can't express it more. It is not something you want to miss out on. It's not something that you want to turn your nose up at. It's the way you were designed to be before you were robbed of your potential by the system that you were born into, because it wants you to conform and do a task within a business to be part of a pyramidal structure of power and commercialism, and it does, and it convinces you that's the only way. But when you come out of it and you're going to the fluid mind space and you're going to hemispheric synchronization, then it's going to get really rich for you. Your relationships are going to get better. Your business is going to get better. Your career is going to get better. Your stress is going to go down. You're not going to suffer toxic stress that you do in the shell identity if you're stuck in there for a long period of time, which is detrimental to your brain, by the way. The neuroplasticity goes down, and you just start to really decay as far as your capacities to think, and also that affects the way you physically work. So your body is a symptom of the mental decay that you have. If you're not growing, you're going the other direction. So when you come into this, you enter in a state of theta and gamma, and this is what we want to develop together. We want to be moving from the alpha and beta, which is, to give you an example, alpha will be when you get out of bed and you're cleaning your teeth and you're thinking sort of certain things, maybe a bit of daydreaming. Beta might be like problem solving. If you're walking to the train, you're trying to decide if you're going to get there on time or the train's going to be on time, these sorts of things. And you're always thinking things through, which is good. And then you go into something called theta and gamma. Now, theta was what we were in mainly when we were between the ages of 0 and 7, and that's like a sponge, and it's really a super creative soup that is an amazing place to be. A lot of people go into meditation to try to access the theta brainwave, but in what I'm going to teach you, I'm going to allow you to get into it and understand it from a position of really being able to access it at any moment. And gamma is very much a much more advanced problem-solving situation where you're starting, but to use gamma and theta, your brain really needs to be in that mind space. If it's in the shell, in the crystal mindset, and that's where it's locked, it's going to find very difficult to even gain access to theta or gamma to start with. So that's where we need to work to before we go much further. Now, in this side, we've got the unconscious is conscious in this. This means that you start to be able to leverage your unconscious mind at 40 million bits of data per second. The conscious mind works at 40 bits of data per second, the unconscious 40 million. On the left side, the unconscious at 40 million bits of data per second is in the ascendancy. It's really running the show. It's on autopilot. It's not directional. It's just following processes. It's very restrictive. On the right side, the unconscious is conscious, and now you can leverage every aspect of your brain. You can put it into a direction, into a flow, into a problem solving. Everything becomes a wonderful opportunity. Most people try to avoid problems, but if you're in core, you want problems, because there is nothing like having a problem to solve. So it's a super cool place to be. So it's a very simple choice for you, as it is for me, as it is for everybody. Do we want to stay in what we've been conditioned to be in? We know from our backgrounds now that when we started off we had a genius level. It's been dropped down, it's been suppressed, and it's a question of whether you want to break out or not. If you want to break out, then you've got to be doing a bit of work. Because where you are right now, if you're 40, well, that's 14,400 days, 20 million minutes that your brain has been taken and brought to where it is right now. If it hadn't had that happen, it would be way ahead of where it is right now. So we've got to unlearn everything that we've learned, that we've experienced so far, to release the mind. And that's what we want to do next. But there's a problem here. And that is your shell identity. It's got these defense mechanisms that we discussed. And everything I say is going to be interpreted through a filter that allows you, as within these pictures here, to look away from moving forward, because it's designed to do so from inside. It's a structure. Now, the first thing, as I said, is you're going to doubt yourself, or me. In terms of yourself, you're going to doubt that you can upgrade your brain. Even though the science tells you can, even though you know that neuroplasticity can change, even though whatever you know, you're still going to doubt yourself, because that's what the shell does to keep you stuck in it. And you might doubt everything that I've said so far. You go, I want more facts, I want more this, I want more that. Yeah, fact is, this is what's happened. And it's up to you whether you want to take the step forward. For some people, it's very difficult for them because they're locked in this shell identity and they only want to believe what they've thought all this time. But if you've a mind for an adventure, then you're in the right place. Delay any action. The shell will not want you to do anything to compromise its position. There's a whole load of reasons for this. They come from Freud, from Jung, from Hanel, from Hill, from Socrates, from Aristotle, Plato. All of these people knew this particular subject that we're talking about. It's not new. You probably don't know this subject, but it's a big one. But it's the beginning point that I'm exposing to you to. So you can start to make your own choices about it and then decide where you want to go. You're going to go into denial potential, which is relating to your potential. You're going to have lots of programs running in the back of your brain that people from your formative years, your teachers, your parents, lots of different people that have inadvertently or actually actively put you down to make themselves feel better, or trying to do the best for you so you weren't disappointed. So you tend to undermine yourself. And this comes down to self-worth and self-validation issues, which are all symptoms of the shell. These are all aspects which will cause you problems in your thinking, which will end up as internal conflict in a number of different ways, which will spill out into the world around you, your relationships with other people, but also internally spill out through your organs, because being in conflict isn't such a good place. Then we go distraction away from the shift. Everything sounds really hard work. We've got to do something because we've been so used to operating a process that we're used to doing that we're in our comfort zone very, very much. So we get distracted by this shell identity, unconsciously moving you away from something that might actually be a threat, cause you pain in some way, in the fact of disappointment, which is a big pain, or failure. So you distract yourself away from it. I've got lots of things to do. We're all busy being busy, that's true. But in terms of the world that we live in, you can be busy being busy your entire life. But if your life is really running, as I said, in black and white as opposed to technicolor, you're going to get to a point one day where you're going to go, why didn't I look at the way that I thought, the organ that was the most powerful thing that I had, my brain, and see how I could have brought it back to the way that it was meant to be working. Not even really so much upgrading it, it's more regaining it. So then you have something called distortion of what you think. So really, inside your own head, the thoughts that you're having are distorted by what we call a personal perspective reality, a lens filter that the new information comes in, it gets distorted to fit your worldview of what the world is and who you are. This is not real, by the way, but you will think it's real. And that distortion process goes on all the time. And then deletion of what you've heard. So ultimately, within a space of a couple of days, you will have forgotten everything I've been talking about, because your brain deletes information all the time. As I said before, that's very much a part of a survival base. And if you don't act on something or make it a priority, then your brain immediately takes that instruction and says, well, that's not something that's necessary. And out it goes. So this is an important thing for you to latch on to, that you're up against you here. It's you against you. You've had the conditioning set in your mind to keep you in this box. It's a question if you really want to come out of the box and see what the world is like on the other side. And to do that, I'm going to have to take your hand a little bit. Now, as we mentioned, there is a construct that you're sitting within at the moment. It's a construct where in social terms you've got to conform, religious terms you've got to conform, legal and political conform, and commercial. In other words, you're stuck in a hamster wheel of making money to serve a lifestyle that you've decided is the one that is, or the one that you think is capable of you to experience. But to get you out of that, we have literally a 4-step system to do this, and we've spent many years developing this, working with groups and individuals to try to understand what is going on in that head of yours, so we can start to liberate you, so you can go into the super creative state. But you've got to want to, all right? You've got to first off actually accept that you can be more, and then really then take each step from there. If you don't want to be more, no one's going to force you. It's actually quite comfortable to be less, because you don't really have to think anything, really, do you? You don't have to really put any sort of pressure on yourself or achieve anything. You can just go along and spend the money, eat the food, have the wine, go to work, and that's it. But if you are of a mind to really crikey, you've been robbed here of your brain, frankly, and really you need to understand how the brain and society works, how they work together. And if you understand that, then it's one of the keys that unlocks you in terms of your potential. It takes that first layer of lockdown away. So quantum psychology is really quite an in-depth subject. It goes into what we call the 6 dynamics of life and 7 aspects of the holistic structure of the mind and how your reality works, which include subjects like psychology, philosophy, theology, physiology, metaphysics, quantum physics, spirituality. These things are part of your holistic identity. And if you can imagine sort of blobs around your head right now, each one of those subjects, you might not have a great deal of knowledge of those subjects, but they still exist there, and they create the reality that you exist within. So your thought manifests what you experience. And I can assure you right now that if you're in this cage affair, your going to experience is going to be somewhat limited and grey compared to someone who's in a super creative state without any limitation whatsoever. So that is what we're playing for here. Now, the next thing is theoretical consciousness, which are challenges to beliefs. It's a particular way of talking you through how you understand a certain subject of these 7 aspects to your holistic identity. And as you start to ask questions, and this is all about you asking questions of yourself, you start to build a bigger picture. It changes the neuroplasticity, expands your bandwidth. Instead of thinking, having a brain that's thinking the size of a golf ball, you're having a brain that's thinking the size of a football, because it's now got a lot more views to work with, a lot more latitude, and that relieves stress, relieves pain, makes you a much more, powerful person, and certainly much more, enjoying life in a much more powerful way. But it is the next level of release, which takes another aspect of the framework away, the jail that you're in. The third thing that is important in the keys to breaking out is something called non-combative argument and Socratic critical thought. To be able to think things through in a critical thinking way, but combined with creative problem solving in the process, is the key to being able to unlock any aspect of the life experience. And to be able to do that in a way that doesn't have emotion tied to it, that really you just get angry or upset and all these sorts of things. Well, that's a very good place to be. So learning how to have that internal dialogue within what we call the mind space is a very, very key skill. And as I said, this kind of stuff goes back thousands of years, and what we're not taught at school and what we should be. Okay, that takes away the next framework. And then there's the last key to this particular first step to releasing the mind, and that's something called polymathic training, which is flow state. Hemispheric synchronization, it's a super place to be because you're leveraging the unconscious mind, as I said, at 40 million bits of data per second, and it's capable of thinking a lot quicker, capable of thought to verbalization a lot quicker. And then beyond that, there's a whole load of other stuff that comes down to uploading from your experiential learning bank, downloading from the quantum field, lots of things that you're completely unaware of, and if you are aware of them, it's about practicing and manifesting them in the right way. But in terms of that and gaining flow state, then you're starting to really make the shift. And that means that you start to still have your left brain. Of course, I don't want to remove it. And it's still, you've got good problem-solving, convergent thinking there. But it's balanced with the right brain. And that is where the innovation and creativity is. So you've got this wonderful mix of alpha and beta, theta and gamma, as you were designed to be. And that is really what mental acceleration is about from a first step position. It's about breaking you out and then starting to get you to learn to run fast. But until you decide that you want to break out of where you are, and until you accept you are in a jail of the mind, you will never be able to learn to be able to put into the mechanisms, the thinking necessary to break you from that jail. And if you want to do that, you can do it and start very, very simply. But why you should start right now is because the company you're working for, the business that you're in, every aspect of your environment, because of the fourth industrial revolution, is going to require you to have super creative thought. And that means you've got to have 4 aspects. You've got to have critical thinking, creative problem solving, empathetic understanding and co-creative abilities. Your thinking has to be super agile and it has to be completely fluid and flexible. And that is what this program is about. So if you want to take the next step, then it's going to begin with an investment into yourself. How big is that investment? How quick do you want the full cake? If you want a small slice of the cake, small slice of the pizza, it's going to cost you £100 and you can get started. All right? If you want the full cake, well, then we can discuss that. Because I would suggest, for me, if I had to spend another day where I used to be up until the age of probably about 45, I would never, ever want to go back there in a million years. I was in a bad place. In fact, I was pretty successful as an entrepreneur. But I realised just how limited my thinking was in terms of the capacity of what it was capable of doing and how it self-defeated itself in so many ways that I was both aware and unaware of. In terms of my shift and what's the difference, well, up until I made that shift, I virtually had hardly any creativity whatsoever on this planet. Now, since I've made the shift, I've written over 1.5 million words. That's over 20 books, created artwork, created structures, patterns, training structures that I never thought possible, and hold events and compare events and do things in flow state that I never thought possible without any preparation whatsoever. It is a totally different way of living. It is the best way of living because it was what we were naturally designed to do. And what does irk me a little bit is that I realised that the educational system that I went into didn't know, those people didn't know this information. It was there, but they weren't so interested because they were conditioned, just as their parents were conditioned and your parents and my parents were conditioned to believe in a certain way. And we just pass on down the ignorance. And when we start to realise our ignorance, we have a choice to maintain it and pretend it's not there, or go, oh dear, that's not a good position for me to be in. I want the full cake, and I want it now. And that's the choice that we all get to make. Thank you very much for listening.